What happens when the men who built heavy metal walk into a church and mean it? Not for headlines, not for damage control, not because a label told them to clean up. We're talking about real conversions. A guitarist walking away from a $25 million contract. A thrash legend refusing to share a stage with bands he believed crossed a line. A shock rocker who built his career on blood, horror, and rebellion, opening a Bible and not putting it down. These aren't rumors. These are documented, life-altering decisions. And somehow, across decades of chaos, addiction, and excess, they all ended up in the same place. Before we get into this, if you want real stories behind the music, not surface-level takes, hit subscribe right now. Because on Metal Icons, we break down what actually happened and why it matters. Watch this till the end, because the final story changes how you look at this entire list. Number 10. Brian Head Welch. Korn. There are rock music exits, and then there is what Brian Head Welch did in 2005. $25 million. That is the figure attached to the contract he walked away from when he left Korn at the height of the band's commercial power. Not because of creative differences, not because of a falling out with Jonathan Davis or the rest of the band, because of his daughter, because of a moment that cut straight through the methamphetamine fog and hit him somewhere no riff ever had. Let's back up and establish exactly who Brian Welch was before any of this happened, because context matters here. Korn formed in Bakersfield, California in 1993, and Welch was a founding member, and alongside James "Monkey" Schaffer, he developed one of the most distinctive guitar sounds in the history of heavy music. The band pioneered what became known as nu metal, a fusion of heavy metal, hip-hop, and alternative rock built around down-tuned 7-string guitars, unconventional rhythms, and lyrics that dealt directly with childhood trauma, abuse, alienation, and rage. It was not theatrical darkness, it was reported darkness. Jonathan Davis was writing about real abuse he survived. The band's appeal was rooted in authenticity, and Welch was instrumental in building the sonic foundation under all of it. Their debut album in 1994 sold over 2 million copies. Follow the Leader in 1998 debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. Issues in 1999 also debuted at number 1. Even by the time Welch made his decision, Korn had sold tens of millions of records worldwide and were firmly established as one of the most commercially successful heavy bands of their era. Welch had also developed a serious methamphetamine addiction. The drug culture surrounding the band and the music industry more broadly had pulled him deep. But the breaking point, the specific moment that cracked everything open, was not a health scare or a legal issue. It was watching his young daughter Jaina singing the lyrics to the Korn song "Adidas," a track with explicitly sexual lyrics, an acronym the band used as the song's full title. His child was singing those words without understanding what they meant, and the weight of what he had helped create landed on him all at once. The meth binge that preceded this moment had lasted 3 days. That what followed was one of the most public spiritual conversions in rock history. MTV documented his journey to Israel, cameras rolling as Welch was baptized in the Jordan River, the same body of water where, according to Christian theology, Jesus received his own baptism. The symbolism was not lost on anyone watching. He left Korn officially in 2005. He released solo Christian-oriented albums. He wrote a memoir titled "Save Me From Myself" that reached the New York Times bestseller list, a detail that tells you the appetite for this story extended well beyond the Christian music market. The book covered his addiction, his recovery, his faith, and the complicated reality of being a heavy metal guitarist who had found God. In 2013, Welch rejoined Korn. He did not renounce his faith to do so, and he returned as a Christian man, playing in a secular metal band, navigating the tension between those two identities openly and without apology. That tension, that refusal to make things neat and simple, is arguably what makes his story more credible than a cleaner version would be. Number 9. Dave Mustaine, Megadeth. If you want to understand Dave Mustaine's conversion to Christianity in 2002, you first need to understand the specific brand of fury that had been fueling him for the previous 20 years, because it was not generic rock star anger. It had a specific origin point, a specific wound that never fully closed, and it shaped everything he ever recorded. In 1983, Mustaine was fired from Metallica. He had been a founding member, a primary songwriter, and a guitarist of exceptional technical ability. He was removed from the band due to his drinking and behavioral issues, replaced by Kirk Hammett, and sent back to Los Angeles on a Greyhound bus. He found out he was no longer in the band during the journey. Metallica would go on to become the biggest metal band in history. Mustaine would spend years carrying the weight of that rejection. He channeled it into Megadeth with extraordinary results. The band he formed became one of the defining acts of the thrash metal movement, commercially and critically. Over 50 million albums sold worldwide. Titles like Peace Sells, Rust in Peace, and Countdown to Extinction are not just metal classics. They are among the most technically sophisticated heavy records ever made. Mustaine's guitar work, his songwriting, and his intensity as a frontman were all real. But the anger underneath it was also real, and it had deep roots. His conversion came during a period of serious physical crisis. A nerve injury to his left arm, the arm that drove all that technical guitar work, left him facing the possibility of never playing again. That kind of forced stillness can produce either bitterness or reflection. For Mustaine, it produced reflection and eventually a sincere engagement with Christianity. His faith immediately collided with his professional world in ways that generated genuine controversy within the metal community. Mustaine refused to participate in tours where he felt the other bands were actively promoting Satanism or occultism. Not just dark imagery, but what he considered deliberate anti-Christian content. He named specific bands publicly: Rotting Christ, a Greek extreme metal act whose name alone told you where Mustaine's objections would land, and Dissection, a Swedish black metal band whose founder had documented ties to a murderous occultist organization. Mustaine's refusals were not popular with metal purists who saw them as censorship or intolerance. He maintained his position regardless. His faith influenced his recorded output directly. The album United Abominations and the track Never Walk Alone carried explicit Christian themes within the thrash metal framework Megadeth had always operated in. The music did not become soft. The theological content was delivered at the same speed and volume as everything else in the catalog. Mustaine is not a musician who converted quietly and kept it private. He has been vocal, sometimes controversially so, for over 2 decades. Whatever your position on his theology or his specific public statements, the conversion is documented, sustained, and entirely consistent with a man who has never done anything halfway in his entire career. If you're still watching, you've probably noticed something. These stories aren't clean. They're messy, complicated, and real. Drop a comment. Which transformation surprised you the most so far? And if you want more deep dives like this, subscribe to Metal Icons. Because the last entries hit differently. Number 8, Blackie Lawless, WASP. The distance between where Blackie Lawless started and where he ended up spiritually is almost impossible to calculate in conventional terms. In the 1980s, WASP represented the absolute outer limit of what shock rock was willing to do. While other bands were pushing boundaries, Lawless was building a stage show that involved torture racks, performers dressed as torture victims, the frontman drinking what appeared to be blood from human skulls, and a codpiece with a circular saw blade attached to it. The band threw raw meat into the audience. Their song Animal, the full title of which was deemed unprintable in mainstream publications, became a flashpoint in the PMRC hearings, the 1985 Senate hearings on explicit content in music. Tipper Gore cited WASP by name. Lawless was not bothered. He leaned into it. What most people did not know or chose to ignore was the biographical information sitting underneath the shock rock spectacle. Blackie Lawless was born Stephen Edward Duran, and he was raised in a religious household. His upbringing was Christian. His rebellion against that upbringing was thorough and sustained and extremely loud, but it was rebellion against something real that had genuinely existed in his life. His return to Christianity came gradually. In the mid-2000s, he began reading the Bible again. The story he connected with most directly was the parable of the prodigal son, the narrative about a son who abandons his father's house, spends his inheritance on reckless living, and eventually returns, humbled and transformed. Given the specific biographical details of Stephen Duran becoming Blackie Lawless and building a career on repudiating everything his father's household had represented, the resonance of that particular parable is obvious and significant. The transformation had a concrete musical result. WASP's 2015 album Golgotha. The title refers to the hill outside Jerusalem where the crucifixion took place. The album's content reflected deep engagement with biblical themes and genuine spiritual conviction. It was, as noted by anyone who reviewed it within the context of the band's catalog, one of the most unexpected records WASP had ever released. Not because the music quality had declined, but because the thematic content represented a complete reversal of the worldview that had defined the band for 30 years. Number 7. Dan Spitz. Anthrax. Dan Spitz's story is unusual even within this list, because his conversion did not just change his spiritual life, it redirected his entire career into a completely different professional discipline. Spitz was the lead guitarist for Anthrax from the band's early days through their commercial peak. Alongside Megadeth, Slayer, and Metallica, Anthrax was one of the 4 bands that defined the thrash metal movement of the 1980s. Spitz's guitar work contributed to albums including Spreading the Disease, Among the Living, and Persistence of Time, foundational records in the genre. He was a legitimate architect of the thrash metal sound. His conversion came in 1993 while he was still an active member of the band. The faith did not immediately pull him out of music, but it set him on a path that would eventually lead him somewhere no one expected. Switzerland. Spitz pursued formal watchmaking studies in Switzerland, earning certifications from prestigious Swiss horological institutions. This was not a hobby. This was professional-level training in one of the most demanding crafts in the world. Swiss watchmaking certification requires years of rigorous study, extreme precision, and technical mastery that operates on a microscopic scale. Spitz committed to it fully and became what is legitimately described as a master watchmaker, specializing in high-end luxury watch restoration. His faith developed specifically into Messianic Judaism, a theological position that combines Jewish ethnic and cultural identity with the Christian belief in Jesus as the Messiah. Given Spitz's Jewish heritage, this represented a synthesis of the 2 central elements of his identity rather than an abandonment of either. He did not disappear from music entirely. In 2010, he founded the Christian metal band Red Lamb, and the project carried a significant connection back to his thrash metal roots. Dave Mustaine of Megadeth served as both co-producer and co-songwriter. 2 converted Christians, both veterans of defining thrash metal acts, of making heavy music together inside a faith framework. Spitz also participated in Anthrax's 2005 reunion tour, briefly returning to the band that had made him famous before returning to his watchmaking work and spiritual life. The coexistence of Swiss luxury watchmaking and Christian metal is not something the rock music world had seen before or has seen since. Number 6. Nicko McBrain. Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden is, arguably, the most persistently and unfairly accused band on this list when it comes to allegations of satanic content. The band's mascot, Eddie, their album artwork, and titles like The Number of the Beast generated genuine moral panic in certain religious communities during the 1980s. The reality of Iron Maiden's catalog is that their lyrics draw from history, literature, mythology, film, and military history, not from occultism or Satanism. The accusations were largely the product of surface-level reaction to album covers, rather than any serious engagement with what Steve Harris and his bandmates were actually writing about, which makes it genuinely striking that the man behind the drum kit for those songs had his own genuine spiritual conversion in 1999. Nicko McBrain is one of the most respected drummers in heavy metal history. His technical approach, his sense of swing within a heavy context, and his contribution to Iron Maiden's sound over 4 decades is beyond question. He was baptized and found faith at Spanish River Church near Boca Raton, Florida, a conversion that his wife Rebecca had been praying and working toward for some time. Her persistent witness and her own faith were central to the process. McBrain has said that during a worship service he felt an overwhelming presence that he identified as the Holy Spirit. He did not leave Iron Maiden. He has continued to record and tour with the band through every subsequent album and tour cycle, sitting behind the kit for records including Brave New World, A Matter of Life and Death, The Final Frontier, The Book of Souls, and Senjutsu. His commitment to the band did not waver, and his faith did not waver either. What McBrain has done is take the testimony aspect of his conversion seriously in his personal life. Between tours, he gives his testimony at churches, speaking openly about his conversion, what it means, and how he has navigated the question of being a Christian man who plays in one of the most visually provocative bands in rock history. His consistent answer is that he sees no fundamental conflict between playing heavy metal and practicing Christian faith. That what he does on stage is music, and what he does in his spiritual life is separate in form, but not in essence. Number 5. Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper's story is the most theologically layered entry on this list, partly because of where he came from before the shock rock persona existed. The man born Vincent Damon Fournier did not grow up outside the church and later discover it. He grew up inside it. His father served as a lay preacher for over 20 years. His grandfather was also in ministry. Christianity was not an abstraction in the Fournier household. It was the organizing framework of daily life. Alice Cooper, the theatrical horror rocker, was, therefore, not simply a rebellion against mainstream culture. He was a rebellion against a specific theological upbringing, conducted loudly and publicly for decades, complete with guillotines, fake blood, snakes, gallows, electric chairs, and every other prop in the shock rock arsenal. The return to faith came in the late 1980s under circumstances that had nothing theatrical about them. His wife Cheryl filed for divorce after his drinking, and drug use had made the marriage untenable. The crisis was real, the consequences were real, and the work that followed, sobriety, reconciliation, and a genuine re-engagement with the Christian faith he had been raised in, was real. He and Cheryl reconciled. The marriage survived. Cooper has been sober for decades and credits his Christian faith directly for that sobriety. He does not treat these as separate accomplishments. He connects them explicitly. And the detail that most consistently surprises people who learn about Cooper's faith is this. He teaches Bible study in Phoenix regularly. The man who perfected the theatrical staging of horror rock, who made the guillotine a concert staple and scandalized the early 1970s music press, teaches the Bible in a church setting. He has done this for years. His explanation for how his stage persona coexists with his Christianity is consistent and considered. He draws a direct comparison to horror films, specifically the tradition of horror as entertainment that operates separately from how the audience and the performers actually live their lives. Vincent Price was not a murderer. Actors in horror films are not villains. Alice Cooper. The character is a theatrical construct designed to entertain, and the man inside that character goes home and attends church and studies scripture. He calls himself the real prodigal son. Given that his father was a preacher and that his decades-long departure from faith was conducted under the most public and theatrical circumstances imaginable, the description fits precisely. Number 4. Mark Farner, Grand Funk Railroad. Grand Funk Railroad's commercial peak in the early 1970s was enormous. 25 million albums sold. Stadium shows that sold out faster than the Beatles. A version of mainstream rock stardom that was fully realized and then, like many things in that era, fully crashed. Mark Farner was the frontman, the lead guitarist, and one of the primary creative forces of the band. When Grand Funk's popularity declined in the mid-1970s, a combination of changing musical tastes, industry politics, and internal band tensions, Farner faced a version of the crisis that hits many artists when the machinery of commercial success suddenly stops. The question of who you are when the crowds go away. His conversion came in the late 1980s. The specific account Farner has given involves hearing what he identified as God's voice during a moment of genuine desperation, a dramatic spiritual experience that reoriented his life. These kinds of accounts are either credible or they are not, depending on the theological framework of whoever is listening. But Farner has told this story consistently for decades without embellishment or variation. The practical result was a transition into Christian rock. He released multiple gospel albums. So he began touring at a different kind of venue, churches and Christian festivals rather than arenas, mixing testimony with the classic rock catalog that audiences still came to hear. We're an American band at a Christian festival is not the most obvious booking in the world, but Farner made it work for years. The authorized biography of his life, From Grand Funk to Grace, covers the full arc. The stadium years, the commercial decline, the personal struggles, the conversion, and the subsequent tensions with former bandmates who did not share his evangelical orientation and did not always appreciate the way he represented the band's legacy in his new context. Those conflicts are documented in the biography and represent the kind of specific, credible detail that distinguishes a genuine story from a sanitized one. Chuck number 3, Reginald Fieldy, Arvizu. Two Korn members on this list is not a coincidence. It reflects the specific spiritual turbulence that moved through that band's inner circle during a particular period, and the two conversions had different shapes, different timelines, and different outcomes. Where Brian Welch left the band, Fieldy stayed. Reginald Arvizu's bass playing was central to Korn's sound in ways that casual listeners might underestimate. The percussive, almost snare-like quality he developed on the bass guitar, achieved through a combination of technique and a custom setup that included additional strings and unconventional playing approaches, was one of the defining sonic signatures of nu metal. When people describe the Korn sound, they are describing Jonathan Davis's vocals, Welch and Monkey's 7-string guitar work, and Fieldy's bass. All three elements are necessary. His conversion in 2005 came through two connected sources: his father's persistent prayers over many years and his own recognition that the fame and success he had accumulated had not actually resolved the emptiness he felt. This is a consistent theme across conversion narratives in this genre, and the frequency with which it appears does not make it less true. The specific combination of fame, wealth, creative success, and persistent internal emptiness is well documented in the lives of commercially successful musicians across many genres and eras. Unlike Welch, Arvizu did not leave Korn. He continued touring and recording with the band while practicing Christianity. a position that generated its own set of tensions because the material Korn performs is not spiritually neutral. Playing songs built around addiction, abuse, and darkness every night while simultaneously living a transformed life requires a specific kind of ongoing negotiation with yourself and your convictions. Arvizu documented that negotiation in his autobiography, Got the Life, which covers both the excess of his earlier years and the spiritual framework he was attempting to build in real time while still inside the machine that produced the excess. He released a solo rap album and began appearing at religious conferences to share his testimony. The balance he struck, staying in Korn, maintaining his faith, being transparent about both, is not the clean narrative of departure and transformation. And it is the messier and arguably more honest version of what it looks like when someone finds faith without everything in their life neatly resolving around it. Number 2. Peter Steele, Type O, Negative. Peter Steele's entry on this list is the only one with a fixed endpoint, which gives it a different weight than every other story here. He died in April 2010 from aortic aneurysm, complications from an infection, at the age of 48. The significance of the spiritual turn in his final years is inseparable from that fact. Steele was the founder, primary songwriter, vocalist, and bassist of Type O Negative, a Brooklyn-based gothic doom metal band that operated at the absolute opposite end of the sonic spectrum from the thrash and nu metal entries on this list. Where Megadeth and Korn moved fast and aggressive, Type O Negative moved slow and deep, constructing long-form songs built on downtuned bass guitar, synthesizer, and Steele's extraordinarily low baritone voice. He stood 6 feet 7 inches and possessed one of the most distinctive vocal instruments in metal history. The band's catalog, Bloody Kisses, October Rust, World Coming Down, engaged directly with depression, loss, romantic obsession, and mortality. These were not theatrical dark themes deployed for shock value. Steele was, by extensive documentation, genuinely and chronically depressed. He spoke about suicidal ideation in interviews. His substance abuse was serious and sustained throughout much of the 1990s. His return to the Catholic faith of his childhood happened in his later years. He spoke about finding peace through prayer in his final interviews. "I'm the specific comfort that Catholicism, the tradition he had been raised in as a child of Irish and Polish descent in Brooklyn, provided to a man who had spent decades writing music about depression and meaninglessness, carries its own particular logic. He was not finding something new. He was returning to something old that he had set aside." Type O Negative's later work carried spiritual themes alongside the band's trademark dark humor and musical density. His faith did not make the music lighter in tone. Steele was constitutionally incapable of lightness, but it gave the darkness a different kind of frame. He died having reconciled with God, by his own account in the interviews he gave in those final years. For the fans who had followed his work and his life closely, that specific detail mattered. Number 1, Michael Sweet, Stryper. Every other musician on this list converted to Christianity after building a career in secular rock or metal. Michael Sweet and Stryper as a whole built their entire career inside Christianity from the beginning. That distinction is worth establishing clearly because Stryper's achievement was not personal conversion. It was proving that the conversion was commercially viable in a market that had given no indication it wanted what they were offering. Stryper formed in the early 1980s in Orange County, California. The band, dressed in yellow and black striped spandex, played melodic hard rock and heavy metal, and were explicitly, openly, unapologetically Christian from their first show. They threw Bibles into the audience. Their album was titled "To Hell with the Devil," and they named themselves after Isaiah 53:5, a biblical verse about healing through the suffering of Christ. There was no ambiguity about who they were and what they believed. The commercial music industry of the mid-1980s was not obviously receptive to this. The mainstream metal audience had its own culture, its own iconography, and its own relationship to organized religion, which was largely antagonistic or indifferent. Conservative Christian communities, meanwhile, were suspicious of the music itself, the volume, the imagery, the cultural associations. Stryper was rejected by both camps initially. They broke through anyway. To Hell with the Devil, released in 1986, sold over 2 million copies and went platinum. The singles, Free and Honestly, were not just successful on Christian radio, they both charted simultaneously in MTV's Dial MTV Top 10, making Stryper the first openly Christian band to achieve that specific benchmark in mainstream music video programming. This was not a niche achievement. This was measurable penetration into the primary youth music market of the era. Over 10 million albums sold worldwide across their career. Sweet continued leading Stryper through their original run, their hiatus, and their reformation, maintaining the same theological conviction throughout. His position on what the band does and why they do it has been consistent since the beginning. Reaching people through rock music is the ministry, not a compromise of it. The entertainment and the mission are the same thing. The broader significance of Stryper in this context is the doors they opened. By proving the commercial viability of Christian heavy metal at mainstream scale, they created space for an entire genre of subsequent acts who did not have to prove the concept from scratch. The Christian metal ecosystem that exists today, labels, festivals, bands, audiences, has roots that run directly through what Stryper built in the mid-1980s. 10 musicians, decades of chaos, millions of records sold, and lives that went in directions no one expected. Some walked away from everything, some stayed right where they were and changed internally, and one didn't get much time after finding peace. This isn't about perfection, it's about direction. If this video made you think differently about music, about people, or about change itself, subscribe to Metal Icons, because the next story might challenge everything you thought you knew.